Hello and welcome to the World Built Environment Forum webinar series. My name is Fausta Todhe, EU Public Affairs Manager at ICS, and I will be your moderator for the day. Today's insightful webinar will focus on critical discussions surrounding the pivotal role the building sector holds in the European Union's ambitious climate and energy strategies. It is a well-documented fact that buildings account for about 40% of the EU's energy consumption and contribute to 36% of the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is organized by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, which promotes and enforces the highest professional qualifications and standards in the development and management of land, real estate, construction, infrastructure. In collaboration with EPRA, the European Public Real Estate Association, which is the voice of the publicly traded European real estate sector, with more than 290 members covering the whole spectrum of the listed and real estate industry. And INREV, which is the European Association for Investors in Non-Listed Real Estate Vehicles, providing guidance, research, and information related to the development and harmonization of professional standards, reporting guidelines, and corporate governance within the non-listed property funds industry across Europe. As we stand today, a significant proportion of our building stock, nearly 75%, does not meet energy efficiency standards, presenting a pressing issue given that a substantial 85% of these structures are predicted to be operational in 2050. This concern is augmented by the current renovation rate of merely 1% per annum. The EU has consistently addressed this urgency, crafting a robust legislative framework that encompasses the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, which are deemed instrumental in attaining the EU's energy and environmental objectives. In a recent development, the Commission embarked on a revision of the EPBD in December 2021, enhancing the existing regulations to resonate with heightened aspirations and the acute necessities of climate and social interventions. This renovated directive not only echoes a broader vision for our buildings towards 2050, but is also lesser focused on markedly reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and final energy consumption of buildings by the milestone year of 2030. As we delve deeper in our discussion today, we'll explore the directive's four cornerstone focus areas: renovation, decarbonization, financing, and modernization. Noteworthy in this revised directive are several key provisions that envision a transformative trajectory for the building sector. These entail the inception of zero-emission mandates for new constructions by 2028, with an accelerated timeline of 2026 for new public infrastructures. It pictures a progressive roadmap for elevating the energy performance ratings across residential, non-residential, and public buildings within the coming decade. Moreover, the directive amplifies the obligations pertaining to the energy performance certificates, extending it to buildings undergoing major renovations and delineating strengthened requisites for sustainable mobility solutions. As we navigate through our agenda today, we will also shed light on the directive's emphasis on integrating the life cycle global warming potential of new buildings into the planning process by 2030, aligning with the levels framework. We anticipate a rich and fruitful discussion today as we unpack the implications and opportunities embedded with these transformative provisions. We look forward to your active participation and engagement as we envision a sustainable and climate-resilient future through the lens of this revised directive. Do please submit questions to our panel, as it really helps to bring the conversation to life. If you are new to this webinar, you should see that you can submit questions to any time using the question box on your screen. We will pick up as many as we can as we go through the questions. The panelists are part of 7 members of the EPBD joint working group created between EPRA, INREV, and ICS. The joint working group will discuss the forthcoming EPBD implementation put in the wider context of the EU and national legislative developments. The objectives of the working group are to create a better understanding of legislative implications for our members in a practical way, share insights on how this can be implemented, exchange information and expectations on the EPBD, gather and disseminate case studies on legislative impact. Without further ado, I would like to start by introducing our members, Jonathan, Annette, and Olivier. They're respectively joining us from Paris, Warsaw, and Hamburg. And I'd like to give the word to them so they can present themselves and a little bit of the work that they do. We can start with Jonathan, please. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, thanks Fausta for the introduction. Hi to all our listeners. My name is Jonathan Martins. I work at Ramboll Management Consulting, focusing on the city and property sectors. And essentially, we help all our clients across the entire value chain to implement their sustainability agenda. So from understanding the upcoming regulations, such as the EPBD, up to implementing them in their day-to-day processes.
Welcome. Hi, Aneta. And welcome to you too.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So my name is Aneta Rusiniak, and I am ESG Director at Invesco Real Estate. My responsibility is coordination of ESG strategy implementation for our pan-European portfolio. And Invesco Real Estate is a global investment management company. Worldwide, we have over $84 billion under management. In Europe, we manage 15 billion euro, which comprises of 200 properties from 6 asset sectors and located in 13 countries. So obviously, the changes in EPBD are very much applicable from all the regulatory, but also the business and practical perspective. And I'm happy to share how, from the practical and management way, we are gonna see the challenges and benefits of the proposed changes.
Thank you for joining us. And hello to Olivier.
Hi, thank you for having me this morning. So my name is Olivier Lamine. I'm the Chief Executive of Austria Office REIT, which is a German office property company. We own 1.5 million square meters of office space across the country. What Austria does is essentially we buy underperforming and old crappy assets. And over our time of ownership, we actually refurbish them and bring them up to standard, not only from an ESG perspective, but also from a new work concept. So this is really at the heart. I mean, the directive is really at the heart of everything we do as an underlying business.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent lineup, and I'm looking forward to start the discussion. We have prepared a set of questions to lead the discussion, but obviously we're going to have an open discussion and we'll try to answer to as many questions as possible received by the audience. I will start with Jonathan by asking, what do you think are the primary objectives of the EPBD and how do they align with the broader climate goals? How do you see the role of the EPBD in achieving the EU's 2050 long-term renovating strategy?
Yes, it's very important to understand that question or the answer to that question, because obviously the objectives are there's quite a few objectives underlying this new piece of legislation. I think one way to understand how wide it is, it's to say that it should be in a way called environmental performance of building directive, because it obviously targets the energy performance as such, but also it has different let's say areas of work going forward for the entire building sector. It also, for example, addresses the environmental performance associated with the renovation of buildings. It targets the improvement of the renovation rates to bring the building stock up to speed and up to the standards in the short, medium, and long term. It also promotes the social impacts of the renovation and the construction and the renovation of the building stock, improving job creation, improving skills across the entire European Union, and also it wants to it wants to help the sector have a very clear idea of where this is going, where they need to go going forward, with having clear dates, clear requirements, and an agenda, so that they can essentially build and renovate buildings now that can be ready for 2030, 2040, 2050. And obviously this new piece of legislation will help the EU achieve its short-term and long-term commitments. One can think of the Fit for 55 package by 2030, and also the Paris Agreement, to which the European Union subscribed. by ensuring that the building sector played its part. I think it's all our listeners probably know this number, that the building sector is about, give or take, 40% of our greenhouse gases emissions. So it must play its part. It must reduce its environmental impact, its greenhouse gases emissions, by squeezing energy demand first. Hence the need to work on the performance of the building themselves.
If I may just add to what
Yes.
Jonathan has said, just to think, I mean, first of all, I just want to comment on the very well documented 40%, because I know this number has been used all over the place, but if anybody knows where it's coming from, really a taker, actually IPCC come with a much lower number. And that includes not only the energy which is in the building, but also the activities, the human activities that take place in the building. So the actual energy used of the building is much lower than that. So I'm not trying to reduce the importance of the building, but just to, I think we need to be very careful with this number because it's floating around. It's actually not scientifically based. The other comment I would like to make is I agree with everything Jonathan has said in terms of target of the the directive, but that's also its weakness. In a sense, it doesn't have one objective. It's pursuing multiple rabbits at the same time. And in doing that, it put forward certain objectives which are contradictory one with the other. The good news is that the directive now officially have a carbon reduction target, which was not the case in the previous directive, and this is what they call energy performance and not environmental performance. And the fact that all of a sudden somebody realized that there might be a difference between energy and carbon is a good thing. But on the other hand, I think the multiplication of targets and sometimes contradictory objective is probably going to render the overall directive less efficient and harder to implement from a practical perspective.
Great, brilliant. I just want to come back because you mentioned that the number is maybe not artificial. I'm not using the correct terminology here, but would you have any idea what the number actually is?
I don't have it on top of my hand, but according to the IPCC, it's in the Chapter 9 buildings. I think the correct number is closer to 28%. A substantial part of that coming from embodied emission. So that's all in the IPCC report, the one from 2022, I think, March 2022. But I've been looking for the 40% number sources for almost 15 years. I have never been able to go back to like where does this number come from initially. Again, I'm not challenging the fact that 28 is a lot, so we need to address it. But I just wanted to highlight that point.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry. Yes.
No, sorry. Please finish your thought.
No, I wanted to mention just the fact that 40%, I've come across that number many times, but I believe that's global instead of just European, which there is difference there, of course. So, but yes, please, Aneta.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we hear all the time this 40%, and I agree that it covers all the Scope 3 emissions, and generally it's a very good marketing tool to say that buildings are like almost in the majority, because if you look at 40% and then the other sectors will probably have less than 60%. So then the buildings are really in importance, and I believe it's needed to say it, because you also mentioned in the beginning of this presentation that 75% of the buildings which already exist in European Union are energy inefficient, and like almost all of them, up to 95%, will still exist in 2050. So there is a huge need to do something about all this stock which already exists. And if it's like 20, 30 or 40% of the total emission, doesn't matter, we just need to start doing. And I think that this directive is very helpful to do it, to force it with the corporates, with the business. Of course, almost every big corporate right now have their own targets, and this kind of regulations are only helping to enforce, and everyone is just working on the same goal. We all want to reduce the world carbon emission and limit the temperature increase. So I think we have, and we will discuss today, all of the challenges, but generally the concept is right, and the ideas that the directive is putting together, and the enforcement on the member states that they need to implement all of this. It's very important and needed for the goal that we all have.
Yeah, absolutely agreed there. Anything that anyone else would like to add? I understand that, yeah, as Olivier said, the object might be a little bit too widespread, including a lot of different aspects into one directive. But as Aneta said, I mean, it's a start. It's a start for the EU, and it's a start towards the right direction, and that's what we're working on eventually. So let's see how it will go. If there are no,
is it a start? Because the energy performance directive has been here for, since I'm around. There have been energy performance directives that have been recast all the time. So I don't think it's actually correct to say that the EU is just starting. I think this direction of travel has been pretty clear since the first directive in 2010, and the fact that things are going to be harder and harder to achieve has been pretty clear. And it's likely you're going to have a new directive 5 years down the road that's going to adjust the target even further. So I don't think this is really a start. We're probably well advanced in the journey. Whether or not we have achieved a lot, that's a different question. But it's not really a start, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Maybe I express myself. Sorry.
If I may just add one thing that we haven't discussed so far in terms of what this directive is also trying to do. I think it's also trying to equip all countries with a common set of terms, standards, methodologies to also be able to compare assets when you look at different assets across the borders. Though the European Union is harmonized in so many ways, in the building sector, for example, in the way you understand information disclosed in an EPC, in an energy performance certificate, there's still some differences across countries, and it's clear the market has been asking for clarifications, for simplification, for harmonization in these things, and I think this revision is also pushing the needle a bit further in terms of achieving that.
I would like to just read one comment that we received from one of our listeners with regards to the 40% as we were mentioning. David says that 40% statistics is from the International Energy Agency report in 2019, which is relatively also old at this point. It is a rounding up of their findings, which states the buildings and construction sector accounted for 36% of final energy use and 39% of energy and process-related carbon dioxide CO2 emissions in 2018. So we have our answers there, but again, probably the 40% is not correct, as Olivier mentioned. We can maybe jump to the next question, and I will give the floor to Aneta. According to you, what could be some of the challenges that member states and professionals would encounter in the implementation of the EPBD, and how can they be addressed, taking also in consideration the differences that every member state has between each other?
Yeah, so we already briefly discussed that this revision is very much needed to define and precise the things that were inconsistent or are just missing in the previous versions, but also is a huge need for the whole renovation movement, and all the objectives and all the targets from the revision will put the need into the member states to start refurbishing the buildings, which obviously maybe not start as Oliver would correct me, but to continue and push a little bit more of the renovation wave. And then obviously it means that there is a huge need for the financial support to be provided from the member states and also from the European Union in terms of incentives program, mobilization of financial institutions to offer programs, green loans, anything which will be accessible and affordable for inhabitants to basically be able to meet all these requirements which are set by the directive. But the biggest challenge which I see is that this is just like a guidance and a framework, and then the member states would need to adapt and propose their own plans, their own interpretation, their own definitions. And we already see a lot of inconsistencies, like Jonathan mentioned, in terms of EPCs, which are not comparable, which are not harmonized. So this directive will help to do it, but it's also a challenge in terms of implementation and deadlines, gathering of the data in terms of presenting the data in the database, which is also part of the requirement from the directive. So all these definitions, discrepancies, data collection needs, the deadlines which the directive is setting will create a lot of challenges. And I think the one of the biggest challenges in terms of implementation and the deadlines that I see from the proposal is the definition of zero emission buildings, or actually setting the obligation to the member states that all the new buildings should be zero emission by 2028. And when we ask what means zero emission, of course there is a definition, but in my opinion it's still not precise enough. And we need to make sure that we don't deliver more exemptions than actual cases. The directive already says that new buildings occupied or operated or owned by public authorities should be zero emission by 2026. So it's a very short period of time. It also says that officially protected buildings and second residences are excluded. So this can create some ways of how to avoid it, especially that member states are free to decide how they define officially protected buildings. The need to have one clear definition for me is a key thing that the Commission needs to propose and work on. We have already obligation to deliver all new buildings to nearly zero emission building standards, but there are so many different interpretations, definitions per country. For me, where I have when I'm working with the buildings with the definitions from all over Europe, it's just not possible to manage it and be able to say what are the actual thresholds per country and how we could properly read it from the documentation which already exists. So the primary energy demand, which is defined in the EPCs but not in all the EPCs, it's very difficult to connect it with the thresholds which are needed by the current definition. So the good thing is that the Commission right now already proposes definition of total annual primary energy use at the national level per relevant climate zones. This could be already defined in the annex to the proposal, but it's only defined for residential and office buildings. So it leaves us with other sectors that still need to refer to near zero energy building standards, which in my opinion are just not precise enough and not well thought. So that would be, from my perspective, the challenge in terms of the deadline to deliver by 2028 or even by 2026 for public, where we are still working on the definitions and interpretation by local member states, and also the requirement that all the energy has to be sourced from renewable sources. This is super ambitious. So for industrial sheds, single family houses, of course, you can imagine that they might be able to produce this residual energy from on-site renewable, but high-rise office buildings, multifamily houses, hotels, shopping centers, I don't believe it's possible at the moment. And Directive is also probably not believing, because they say that whenever it's technically or economically not feasible, the energy can be sourced from renewable energy from the grid, but it has to be done via the power purchase agreements or renewable heating and cooling purchase agreement. So this is the way how to manage this challenge, but there is still a huge work to be done to define how this power purchase agreement should be structured, and practically how it would work for these countries where the national grids are also not super well prepared to absorb this amount of renewable energy. So I think it's a great thing to be done and a huge step, but still a lot of work for the Commission and also member states to make it actually doable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I may just add to Anita's response to that, I think the financial challenge is going to be central to this, particularly around the renovation projects that are going to be needed going forward. Obviously, a good renovation is a deep renovation that really transforms the buildings, really improves significantly the energy performance of that building, and it is a very expensive. Is a very expensive project, probably too expensive for many owners and tenants where applicable. I think the member states should really reinforce their toolbox of financial technical support to really accelerate. One of the things that this revision of the EPBD that is seeking is to accelerate the rate of renovation. We stagnate at about 1%. We need to go towards 2-3% per annum. That is a massive challenge. And obviously, one question that's, I think it's an open discussion, and perhaps would be good to hear the listeners, is what's going to happen with those buildings that are just too expensive to renovate, perhaps in non-prime locations, where who is going to effectively address those buildings because the business case might not stack up with a deep renovation. So I think that's yet to be seen in the next few years. What is going to happen to those buildings which are quite or constitute quite a large volume of square meters across Europe?
If I may just like jump in the debate here, but I think just to step back for a minute, because it might sound from what we're discussing that the directive is set in stone and it's finalized, which as far as I understand it's not. It's still being discussed, and there's still going to be debate and argument. And one of the contention point actually is the principle of subsidiarity, which basically states that the decision needs to be made as close as possible to the citizens, and therefore the likelihood that we end up into an overall European framework, which can apply everywhere in the same way, is fairly limited. That's one of the major pushback that the current proposal is according to the EU information. And then I think this is also where maybe where we kind of confusing things, because from a practical perspective, when you're on the ground, I mean, we have the money to renovate. That's not the problem, at least our assets, but there is no workforce. So you can throw all the money that you want to the problem if there's nobody actually to come here and do the renovation. And one of the reasons why there is no workforce is because we have too much like new construction happening. So if we were to reduce the amount of new construction, reallocate those people to renovation and make renovation a priority, then maybe we would have a different perspective. And this is where I think the directive is kind of chasing multiple targets at the same time. I agree with everything Aneta says on the struggle in terms of deadlines that are probably too short. I don't think any European country is going to be able to put together an EPC database between now and 2026. It's something they have not been able to do over the last 10 years. So it's kind of hard to see how this is going to happen in an efficient way. But beyond that, again, I think the problem of renovation today is essentially the problem of availability of human resources and also allocation of resources where they need to do. So maybe there's a need to build like housing in some stress area. Most probably there is that need. But there's probably less of a need to build commercial buildings and other more like for-profit construction. And as long as you don't address those issues, it's very, very likely that you're going to speed up the renovation because the main constraint is actually not necessarily money, it is resources. And that's something we've seen prior to COVID, after COVID, and we're also seeing now. There's a massive constraint on the availability of personnel actually to work it out, and that's not something the directive is addressing, and it's not trying to provide any solution to that. And this, by the way, only makes things more expensive, right? It doesn't make it cheaper that you have less people who are able to do it. So it kind of increases the financial problem. And those are basically the priorities that I think the EU is not setting forward. They should basically try to redirect where they think it's more important, and that's a decision they're not willing to take at this point in time.
So what if I might jump in here and maybe pose with another question, what do you think, or what would be the role of the BPT in fostering job creation and skill development in the green building sector, which is exactly the problem that ODA is bringing to light right now?
Yes, we obviously started discussing this workforce topic already. Clearly, the lack of workforce is a key constraint for the market. But I think purely from a skills development point of view, clearly, and I'm focusing on the renovation aspect here, clearly the need to train personnel to new techniques, new technologies, new ways of actually renovating buildings, that is essential. We will not achieve our targets without getting our workforce up to speed. One thing that needs to be said is that the construction sector is made of a lot of really small companies, perhaps who don't have the means and the capacity to invest in their people the same way the large construction companies can. And often they're also interrelated with these large companies. So these, let's say the governmental agencies, ministries, should be behind the push towards, more trained personnel, more personnel on site, obviously more personnel. And also, one thing that is indeed mentioned in the EPBD, but perhaps not clearly addressed, is that we need to make sure that what is done eventually is effectively done according to state-of-the-art practices. There's been, many stories out there about renovation projects poorly done, quickly done, especially when they are partly publicly funded. There's been a lot of issues in homeowners complaining about the quality of the renovation that has been done here and there. So I think we need to ensure that there is a set of controls so that the sector gets up to speed and actually does the job properly. Obviously, not blaming anyone. There's the vast majority of companies do their job very, very, efficiently and professionally. But this is clearly a risk that the implementation of the EPBD should address as a priority, because it will give confidence. It will give confidence to obviously to those who invest in buildings, those who own buildings. But it will also give confidence to the wider public.
And I think Jonathan is fully on the point here, in the sense that, and look, what the directive is looking at in this current form, for instance, is improve smart buildings. And we just discussed that, the construction industry is small firm, which would need actually to get up to speed with the current construction way, and then, so basically putting the bar so high is just not going to help to actually achieve that result. And so I do believe that, if you're running a construction company today, building a new building is much, much, much easier than renovating one. You take much less, it's much less complex. You know what you're doing. You start from a blank page. And so if we don't provide the incentive to actually move into the renovation business by making it harder to actually go into the new building, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to have people going there just because they want to save the planet. So I was thinking about the construction industry here. So I think, what we're doing, we're making it more complex by introducing a lot of technology. We know, at least I know by experience, my experience is that when you introduce complex technology in the building, what happens is that the people who are implementing that technology are not trained to implement it, and therefore it's badly implemented, and therefore you can't really use it the way you intended to use it in the first place. And we're not going to get there over the next 5 years. So I think this is where I think the directive is still looking at a very, very high level, and it's going to be hard for people on the ground to actually be able to differentiate about, what should I do to actually be efficient in what I'm trying to achieve in renovation, while still hitting the obligation that the directive is putting on us. That how do you manage that kind of balance? I think this is where the challenge is going to be for the operating people on the ground. Whether or not the directive is actually going to accelerate anything, I'm very, very much doubtful.
Yeah, no, I agree and share some of your concerns. Obviously, what's happening is it's pushed down towards the member states to define how they are going to define and implement a plan to ensure that there's enough training. There's they have vocational training for to support the industry to get the right people in the right places with the right volumes. It's obviously not clear. Certain states might do it properly, some others might just not put enough funds into promoting that. That's again what by the same token, it's obviously one of those things that it's not clearly harmonized at EU level. It's down to the member states to define how to do these things. So completely share the risk and the concerns.
Yeah, and I think also that it's one of the job creation also means that we will have a huge need for technical support in all this data collection and understanding of the definitions, and also understanding of the methodology of calculations. The directive is proposing to introduce embodied carbon into the EPC, so that we will have the whole life cycle and global warming potential information data on the EPCs, which I think it's also very much needed for the things that you mentioned about the desire to build new buildings rather than renovate. So it's a very small step. It's just about right now the disclosure, and then they need to think about the next steps. But starting from disclosure and making sure that people are collecting information about the embodied carbon from the major renovations, from the new buildings, it's the first step to start also thinking about the need for the modernization rather than the new buildings. But it requires a lot of education, and I think it's just it's also an opportunity for the job creation in this area.
Brilliant discussion, and not to be the devil's advocate, but I do know that the Commission is investing a lot of money in funding projects with regards to training, with regards to improving the workforce, also related to the greening of the buildings. It's just that, as we all know, of course, these projects go on for between 2 and 3 years, sometimes successful, sometimes not, and from the theoretical part, so what the Commission prepares, into the implementation part, and actually having these trainings visible at the member state level, it will definitely require a lot of time, a lot of effort also from the member state side. So I absolutely agree. Thank you all for your inputs on the question. Just being a bit conscious of the time, I'll just move on to another question. I'll direct it to Olivier, if you can. What do you think are the expectations for the next revisions of the EPBD, and how can it further align with evolving climate goals? We more or less touched a little bit on that, but if we can go more in depth on how can stakeholders implement strategies that not only meet existing obligations, but also anticipate potential emerging needs?
So as we've discussed before, I mean, the EPBD is an ever-evolving beast, so it just keeps on evolving every 4 or 5 years. And I would expect that there's going to be a revision. My expectation is that it's likely that we're going to realize that the targets that are set by this one are not going to be enough to get us to the next point, and then they're going to reinforce the targets. But at the end of the day, it can also be a kind of a wishful thinking, because the reason why the targets are not enough and we're not able to meet them is simply because we're not doing enough on the ground. So at one stage, I think we should stop collecting data, and we should stop, but we should start doing things. And there's a huge difference between doing things and actually speaking about it. And for the time being, as an industry, we're speaking a lot about it. We're arguing that we don't have the right data, we don't have the right information, we don't know what we need to do. The fact of the matter is we do. We know what is actually emitting a lot of carbon. We don't know exactly, we don't know precisely. I can't give you like an exact number, but we know exactly where it's coming from. But we're not doing much in order to change that, and we're not doing much simply because we're arguing that, oh, we need more time to measure. I mean, I've been looking at that problem for the last 25 years, and since 25 years, we've been trying to measure better. And I don't think that's really going to get us there. So I'm going to take another example, which is outside of the discussion, but I think it's the same cause leading to the same result. The CREM, which is a carbon risk monitor for real estate. I mean, they just published a new pathway to the 230 and 250, and they are much, much more stringent than they were like 4 or 5 years ago. And the only reason why they're more stringent is because we're just not doing enough in the first place. So the CREM is likely to become also more stringent. So the direction of travel, I think, for the directive is clear. They're going to be more required, more effort to be done in the future. But then, I mean, by just improving the effort or increasing the demand in terms of effort, it doesn't end up having any real effect in real life if we don't start working actively on the assets, which is unfortunately not something the directive is at this stage really helping to achieve.
Very interesting. Anyone else would like to comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to add, obviously fully support the idea of, stop measuring. I think there are still some challenges around measuring, but, give or take, we know more or less where the emissions come from, where, thermal leaks are in buildings and these kind of things. I think what this revision of the EPBD is doing and is giving a little bit of visibility over the next 5-10 years, where a building needs to be in 10 years. Obviously, beyond that, there's still some question marks around requirements. When we look at national legislations for buildings, for many countries, it is a very needed and positive evolution. There's still so many countries where we don't know what a building will look like at the end of the decade, purely from a performance, energy performance requirements perspective. So at least it gives everyone this sort of pathway where we know a building at the end of the decade needs to look like this. And obviously, if you build it now, it needs to be at least not necessarily ready, but at least it needs to be in such a position that it can comply with those requirements in a few years at the least, at the minimal cost possible. Beyond the end of the decade, 2040, 2050, where we know that we will need to accelerate, we know we'll need to mitigate climate change, because we talk about reducing emissions, but the long-term problem, so to speak, is also adapting to a changing climate. When we think about things like indoor thermal comfort, use of water, being ready to be used by occupiers in a hotter climate, essentially in many areas across Europe. I think this piece of legislation is really helping the market to see things a little bit clearer. It's not 100% perfect, let's be honest, but at least it gives that sense of clarity for the years to come. At least that's how I see the current proposal by the European Parliament as a minimum.
Yeah, and maybe from my side, what I would like to add to the next one, because obviously, as you both said, probably there will be a need to clarify or extend the deadlines, or maybe give a little bit more definitions or precisions or what is expected currently, because the current revision is really introducing a lot of changes. But from my wishful thinking, what I would like to see in the next one would be to have a link between the embodied carbon with the energy performance requirements, to make sure that we actually limit this embodied carbon via the renovations that are done. So the obligation to choose the proper materials, to limit also this embodied carbon from the renovations, but also to make sure that we are prevent from adding the new stock, because it was also said that if we look at the need for the new buildings to be delivered, or the requirements to improve the existing building to the certain point, it's just easier to add a new stock, to build a new one, but it's not the way how we should do it. So probably the embodied carbon would be here a solution, or at least help support with that, but there is a long way to do it. So that's my wishful thinking. And then more clearing on renewable energy from the offsite supply, how the members can actually enable renewable energy market development. I know it's not purely this directive, but still it's this is a huge part of it, to require the buildings to be covered from the renewable energy on-site, or if not possible off-site, but the national grids are just not ready yet to onboard this amount of renewable energy. So that would be my gap, what I see right now in this revision.
Yeah, there is a long way to go, it seems. I will then turn to Jonathan to ask him how can stakeholders, including the general public, engage more actively in the discussion and implementation revolving around EPBD. And to that, I'll also add a short question from Michael, and I believe this probably interests every homeowner out there in the EU. Who will carry the costs of retrofitting, especially with regards to residential homes?
Yes, to answer the first question about stakeholders, I think attending this webinar is already a way to engage with EPBD, to understand what it says, and at least in its current draft version, understand the complexity of the different goals it seeks to achieve. I think we've extensively discussed that since the beginning of this webinar. It's like I said, and I repeat myself, it's not just about energy performance. It does cover so many aspects, all the way from energy, the building envelope, the smart readiness, the solar panels on the roof. It's quite a wide-ranging piece of legislation. I think I would distinguish the general public from let's say, the more professional part of our sector. The general public needs to obviously understand what it means for them going forward. I think the EPBD is calling for the states to establish a network of one-stop shops to provide, information support. I probably can mention the name of the France Rénov agencies in France, which have been, very good for citizens to get access to this kind of information. So that's a way, in a way, that the onus is on the states to actually, bring the information or trickle the information down to the general public. I don't think many people read very long, complex pieces of legislation, unfortunately. On the more professional side of things, I really would urge the entire value chain from construction companies, developers, investors, up to also manufacturers of building products, because the notion of embodied carbon is really strong in this piece of legislation. The global warming potential, we're getting a lot of requests from building product manufacturers to understand what it means for them, because obviously they're just one part of the equation, but one part plus one part plus one part, that makes quite a substantial contribution. So I would really encourage them to read at least or to follow the latest discussions on the revision of this legislation, to seek guidance. I think it's not easy, to be honest, to understand what a building in 2027, 2030 will look like, how to combine the different technical constraints, complexities, and how to work with embodied carbon. Historically, the sector has focused a lot on operational carbon, so it's energy use. The embodied carbon is not a recent discussions, but still more recent in its impact on the markets. And also seek understanding of how to or seek guidance on how to make the best investment decisions, so that you invest in the right buildings to ensure that when you get out of that investment in a few years' time, your building is still fit for purpose, not just from a legal perspective, but also from a market expectations perspective. So this would be my sorry, go ahead, Olivier.
No, I was just saying, I think you made a very important distinction in your introduction to that question, which is the difference between homeowners and professional investors or professional owners. And this is unfortunately something which is not so apparent in Directive, except that at one point it says that if it's too onerous to do, then it shouldn't be done in certain social aspects. But the difference is really fundamental, and that's kind of missing, because just from a resource perspective and also capacity perspective, professional investor or owners have probably much more means and ability to react than homeowners, and the way to address them is also different, as you highlighted with the France Rénov example, which is more addressing the individual than the professional. So I think this kind of difference is really key to be able to address the challenge ahead of us, because for a professional investor, it's not really a cost question. Any building that you own today, if you intend to own it between now and the next 15, 20 years, you will need to renew the heating system, you will need to renew the cooling system, and at that moment in time, you will probably be using the right technology to do that. So we might not have the time to wait until that moment happens, but in principle, if you're buying those for profit, all of that should already be accounted for, and you shouldn't really have a problem with that ability. If you do, then you probably badly underwritten your asset in the first place, but that's the risk you're in. If you're a homeowner, it's a bit different, because you don't necessarily think that long, and you don't necessarily do capex plan for your assets. And in that sense, I think the renovation passport that is being proposed by the EU is going to be very helpful for homeowners, which basically are going to be able to see this is how much it's going to cost to renovate this building or this apartment I'm buying over the next 15, 20 years, whereby for professional investor, this is really holding us by the hand, because we should have that already in our toolbox. So this is where I think there's also, and it's probably the misery of real estate, is there's usually no difference being made between professional owner and non-professional owners. And although there's a massive difference in terms of behavior and risk that we're able to tackle on one side and on the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have a comment actually from David saying that as someone who delivers environmental management ESG programs across the EU, he finds obtaining copies of energy performance certificates difficult, and commercial agents seem reluctant to share with the EPC ratings online. And he's also asking actually, why is this? I don't know if anyone would like to give his thoughts on this. Maybe this is more from a practical point of view, actually, for someone who works directly on energy performance of buildings.
I mean, it's hard to see why anybody would not share an EPC, because this is something, most of the case you will have to share anyway at the end. It's probably, if the EPC is bad, you probably have the feeling that you're going to push away some of potential tenants if you're looking at an asset. But I mean, the reality is most of the people kind of overlook the EPC because the value of the EPC itself is kind of really questionable, and whether or not it gives you a real indication. I mean, that's at the heart of the EPC conversation. But that's also something Directive is trying to address, but I think it's going to be unlikely to address. So that I would guess the only reason why people are reluctant to share it is because they don't like the result of it. Because if you have an EPC A+, I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be more than happy to share it and put it up all their life you would have.
Yeah. This revision of the directive is also pushing to create a national databases, so the EPCs should be visible and accessible for everyone. Of course, it's not the case right now, but from the commercial perspective, we also see it that it's a new thing to ask during the transaction when we buy a building or where we sell a building, to actually provide the EPC. It's right now, I mean, usually when we ask, it's not a problem, but it's a new thing, so people are not used to it. It just needs to change, because this is the essential information before we actually commit to the transaction. So I think it's just a matter of time. It's a process, but yeah, we still see some transactions where when the sellers are reluctant to share this information because they believe it's just not a standard piece that they would share. Usually they were sharing for the last 20 years, but it's not something that we would not get at the end.
And talking always to you, Aneta, if you could walk us through the tangible benefits and potential challenges associated with the proposition surrounding the establishment of minimum energy performance classes and their structuring of the EPC scheme.
Yes, of course. So minimum energy performance standard, as you said at the introduction start, is requiring all the residential buildings to be minimum E by 2030 and non-residential buildings by 2027, and then to improve to EPCD by 2030. So the biggest challenge is, as we also briefly said, it's the deadline, because it gives us only 4 years from today to get to the level which is still not defined, actually. So everyone who needs to report under SFDR, EU taxonomy, or just looked at the differences between EPCs between countries in Europe knows that it's a mess, and it's very difficult to manage. There are differences between countries in methodologies, in the scale of energy bands, subcategories, energy sources, expressions. It's just simply not comparable, and all EPCs are done without diligence, and very often they are just wrong. So there is a huge work, and this directive provides a huge opportunity to make it right by proposing the standardization, harmonization, rescaling of EPCs, and finally the common template. So there is already proposed an annex what should be in the standard template of EPC, and I basically agree with everything what is in there. The information is very transparent. It's a very good idea that all the EPCs are reserved for the zero emission buildings. Of course, we need to get to the definition and make sure that it's clear for everyone, but it will provide standardization and transparency on the market. Also proposing introduction of A+ buildings that will be like super efficient, meaning that they are gonna they cannot exceed more than 15 kilowatt-hours per square meter per year in primary energy demand. I think it's very ambitious, but also a great proposal to have something which is even better than the zero emission building. It will also mean that they need to have a higher production of renewable energy on site based on the monthly average, and be carbon positively regarding the building's life cycle, global warming potential. So I think it's a great proposal. Also to have the EPCG, which will refer to 15% of worst performing buildings of the national stock, but it leaves us with the rest of the scale that each country has to define by 2025. So it's just, as Oliver said already, probably not possible looking at where we are as of today. So this revision and the negotiations which are right now happening most probably will just tackle this this challenge, and also the challenge is that the currently top 15 best performing buildings is covering much wider range that the EPCA is proposing. I mean, it's not a challenge; it's just that the older stock will need to face it, and that probably will be also visible in the maybe not value, but generally how the buildings are performing. And then also, I think the obligation to include global warming potential on the EPCs, as I said, it will create a great standard and force the market to better measure and collect data for embodied carbon. So this is a challenge, and we already discussed it for this webinar, but it's also a great opportunity for the practical. I mean, we all aim to do it, and from the practical perspective, being an investor, when we try to push our stakeholders, our providers to collect this data to make it visible, which is not currently regulatory proposed, or it's not a currently market standard, it's just very difficult to push for it. When it will be introduced by this directive, it will just make our life easier. So I'm very happy that this corresponds with the overall targets and objectives that we as a business have right now. So just conscious of time, maybe because we are just at the end of the webinar, but yeah, obviously there are a number of challenges that we discussed with the availability of information, definition, inconsistencies, calculation methodologies, all of this. I don't want to say about the practical and financial aspect, but generally from my personal and also professional perspective, this standardization of EPCs and harmonization of the scale, it's I think one of the biggest benefits of this revision. But yeah, let's see how it goes with the implementation.
Thank you very much. And only because of the lack of time, we cannot go on further discussing this, which I think we could do for the rest of the day at this point. Thank you very much for all of your insightful comments and discussions. I mean, I personally enjoyed it and learned a lot. I hope also our listeners as well. I'd like to thank you for your participation and for your time today. And for the general public, I would like to remind you that we'll publish a recording and written summary of this webinar online. Please feel free to share it with those with your professional network, and also please do take a few moments to let us know what your thought of today's session was by completing an online poll, which will appear on your screen at the very end of the webinar. Also, I'd like to bring your attention to future webinars and conferences and the recording of previous webinars that are also available online. Also, please take a look at our podcast series, have a listen and tell us what you think. If you'd like to know more, by the way, I'd like to bring the attention. Okay, the slide left. We do have an event happening in Venice, the RCS World Build Environment Forum Europe, happening between 19 and 20 of October. Please do scan the little barcode. It will give you all the information. Also, please feel free to register and participate. It will be a very interesting event as well, and decarbonizing Europe's built environment, a sustainable approach for people, planet, and profit. You can find also other events on the website of World Build Environment Forum. You can follow us on the new revamped Twitter named X today, Instagram and LinkedIn, where you can receive all news of upcoming webinars and catch up on anything that you might have missed. with 1 or probably less than 1 minute to go. Until next time, goodbye, and thank you again for your attention.